I've just received something very interesting in the mail, and I'm very excited to review it. It is the EDS OX wireless derailleur. And now, why that's really interesting is it's not from SRAM or Shimano. It's from a brand known as Wheeltop. Now, if you're like me, you haven't heard of Wheeltop before, so I'll read you the little blurb they sent me. Wheeltop is a leader of high-quality bicycle transmission components since 1951. Our mission is to provide affordable yet durable cycling accessories that allow more riders to experience the enjoyment of wireless shifting, so on and so forth. Now, I'm assuming they haven't been making wireless derailleurs since 1951, but yeah, apparently they've been making components for quite a while. Alright, well, packaging seems nice. Let's open this up. Now here's the derailleur. The build quality is very nice, and of course it looks like a derailleur. Only, if you look in here, you see here is the little motor that's going to allow you to shift electronically, and then you've got a built-in battery right here. Somewhat reminiscent of a SRAM derailleur, and yeah, overall very familiar and, you know, very solid feeling. And then here we have the shifter, and of course, somewhat reminiscent of the transmission in the new like pod shifters. It's got the dual thing, nice and clicky. It's, you know, it's good quality. Is it as fancy as the transmission one? No, but it's at least a good value. And one thing I noticed is, yeah, they've already paired it for me. So away I go. All right, I am going to install this derailleur onto my Fugitive. I'm going to take off the XT derailleur that I just put on and install this. Now, if you've installed derailleurs before, which I think a lot of you have, the install process is more or less exactly the same, except there's no cables. The only thing that's really different about this that you would maybe have to check, this derailleur can be set to work from 3 to 14 speeds. So if you've got 3 gears in the back for some reason, or in the future when we have 14, yeah, this derailleur is going to be able to do that, and that's all through the app. And the next thing I have to do is adjust this derailleur so that the lowest or highest gear, the hardest gear, lines up. And I think I can do that in here, or I can do that in the app, I believe. All right, to get in to adjust the high and low set screws and the clutch, you do have to take off this little bolt here. 1.5 millimeter. That is a tiny, tiny bolt. I think if I had one recommendation already, it would be to not use this small of a bolt. All right, well, one little difference between the derailleurs. I've got the B tension set correctly up on the first gear here, but down in the highest gear, I still got a lot of slack in the chain. So I think this derailleur or something must be a little bit shorter than the XT, and I'll just have to take a link out of my chain. All right, I did get the derailleur installed and working last night. Relatively straightforward, almost exactly the same as putting on a regular mechanical derailleur, with a few extra steps that you might do in the app. But I did have one issue, which I think is an odd combination of this bike and the derailleur, and okay, let's take a closer look. It's probably a bit hard to see, but when we're in the highest gear or the smallest cog, in order to not have the derailleur hit my frame, I have to run kind of an awkward chain length, like as short a chain as possible with a bit of extra B tension, because the guard around the lower jockey wheel, it hits the side of the frame here. And now my frame actually from the axle goes down a bit and then across. And if you look at other frames, a lot of them just go straight across. So that clearance issue probably didn't come up when they were trying it on different bikes. But yeah. Doesn't exactly fit on my Noli. All right, it is that little guy right there. You can see the guard of the jockey wheel hits the inside of my frame right here. And now I did send them an email and asked them what was going on, if they'd seen this before. And all they did was send me the instructions on how to install the derailleur again. And now this isn't an issue with setting B tension or chain length or setting the high or low limit screws. It's not that the derailleur is too far into the frame. It's as far into the cassette as I can make it go without it shifting up in gears. And the chain is as short as I can make it, and the B tension, well, it's as loose as I can make it without having the derailleur hit the frame. Either way, yeah, something about the way that this derailleur sits on this frame doesn't exactly work. I think if I just shaved off a piece of this cage, it would be totally fine. But yeah, something to think about. But like I said, I did get it to work. So yeah, we're still gonna go ride this derailleur and see what it's like. All right, so we've got the derailleur installed. The derailleur and shifter retail for 600 Canadian, which is a bit cheaper than the GX transmission. And, well, first of all, how does it feel as a derailleur? And all I can say is, yeah, shifts well. Every time you click, shifts nice and precise. I think the feel of the shifting in between gears is largely going to be a function of which cassette and chain you choose. So I've got an SLX cassette and an XT chain on this bike, and yeah, it more or less feels like a Shimano, whatever is it Hyperglide? Yeah, it shifts well under load because I think the chain and cassette are doing a lot of the legwork here. Although the physical feel of the shifting pod is less refined than the SRAM transmission, I actually really like the clickiness of the buttons. I find the transmission is maybe a little shallow and a little hard to push. Yeah, I like these big, almost, I don't want to say clunky, but they're big clicky buttons. I would say overall, shifting feels similar to the old SRAM Axis, the original wireless derailleur that they made. And for those of you curious, it does come in at 400 grams, which I think is a little heavier than your traditional derailleurs, but a little bit lighter than other wireless derailleurs. It also has two shifting modes, leisure and race I think it's called, which allows you to kind of adjust how much power the derailleur uses. Basically, in race mode you can just hammer through the gears. Yeah, it shifts faster than I would ever want to shift, and it definitely shifts faster than the new GX transmission. It also does have some features like an adjustable clutch, which is one thing I really enjoy, and we'll find out later how well that works to keep the derailleur quiet. Wheeltop claims the derailleur is good for 20,000 shifts, and so far, yeah, it seems the battery life is decent, and I haven't had it long enough to test it for that long. The battery isn't removable though, which is somewhat concerning to me, because the charging port is also kind of strange. Because yeah, if you're out on a ride and you run out of power, yeah, you're not going to be able just to plug your bike in. Being able to at least swap batteries, hot swap them, is kind of a big deal when it comes to wireless stuff. You can also micro adjust every gear, which is something that's pretty handy when it comes to derailleurs, because we tend to bash them a lot as mountain bikers. And like I said, everything else about the derailleur is pretty normal, except for where the high and low set screws are kind of in odd places. Also, they're covered up by that plastic cover thing, which has a micro bolt, which, if you're a mountain bike company, please stop putting 1.5 millimeter bolts on things. They strip immediately, and they're awful. We should set a new standard like 3 mil and bigger. There's also no lock on the main pivot. You'll notice on the new SRAM transmission, one of the big benefits is that the derailleur is clamped to the frame, and so there's no main pivot to swing around. The old Axis, similar to this derailleur, didn't have that. And even though if you had a great clutch or whatever, you'd hit a bump and the whole derailleur would rotate around the main pivot, and yeah, that caused my derailleur to break and be insanely loud. I am concerned that this derailleur is going to do both of those things, and I guess we'll just see. And as far as adjustments go, a lot of it is done through the app. The app works well, but it's also clunky. It's a newish product. They're a Chinese team, I believe, and so as far as something translated from Chinese into English, they've done a pretty good job. It just is, obviously there's a few words that are clunky, and it takes some time to figure out exactly what means what and where things are. But as far as actually working, once you figure out what little tab you're supposed to go into, it does work well. Okay, let's ride up this trail a little bit and see how the derailleur does, and then let's come back down and see how quiet it is. All right, so let's do a little derailleur testing with, some aggressive punches up these little rocky tech sections. And there you go. It did the derailleur thing. Yeah, when it comes to parts like derailleurs and chains and cassettes, bars, a lot of that stuff is, if I don't notice it, then it's good. Okay, let's find out how it does on a little bit of downhill. Some chunk here. All right, reasonably quiet so far. All right, pretty impressive actually. I was expecting it to be as loud as the old Axis, but it actually seems quite a bit quieter. Now it's all still new, and new derailleurs are always pretty quiet, but we're off to a good start. I think I might tighten up the clutch a hair more. It's not as silent as my XT, but it's reasonably quiet. I do hear a bit of metal clunkiness, I think from just the weight of the derailleur moving around back there. All right, I'm gonna ride a rougher trail now, and I'm gonna see if the derailleur jumps gears at all, like the old Axis used to. And I'm also gonna see how quiet the clutch is. All right, it didn't jump around on me, but the one thing I'm noticing about this derailleur is because I think it's got a lot of mass on it with the battery and the motor, and since it's not attached to the frame at the main pivot, it is still a little clunkier than a traditional derailleur. I would put it feels somewhat similar to the old Axis, but a little bit better. And like I said, my main concern now is that because I do think it is slopping around the main pivot and it is a heavier derailleur, that's going to cause a lot of wear on the derailleur, and it's only going to get louder and clunkier as we go on. But we'll tell if I test this thing long term. I will give Wheel Top credit here though. In terms of a derailleur that isn't from the big two, it's pretty good. I've tried non-SRAM, non-Shimano derailleurs, and yeah, they've all been pretty bad. Apparently making a derailleur is pretty hard, so in general, in the context of derailleurs, they've done a good job. But if you ask me, would I rather have this setup or the transmission, I'd have to say the transmission. The transmission, just as an overall package, is very refined and it's good, and the only complaint that I have about it is that the clutch is kind of weak. Where this wheel top derailleur comes in, I think it would be great for someone who has a mechanical setup already. They want wireless shifting, but they don't want to spend what, $2 grand to get a whole wireless group set. They can just buy this derailleur for 600 bucks with a shifter, and boom, you got wireless shifting. And depending on what you're riding, like if you're just riding cross country, light stuff, yeah, the difference really isn't huge. And where you'll see the biggest differences are at the margins, like if you're riding pretty hard, either you're a racer, you're riding here on the shore or sea to sky, that's where the robustness and the refinement that SRAM's done to the transmission group set really all comes together. But if we pull that back a little bit to a more average rider, I think the differences really aren't that huge. But I think this derailleur only needs a few improvements to make it really great. It seems like there's some slop here causing some noise. The clutch could use some refinement. It feels more just like a strong spring, and this needs to be locked out. So if you're very picky like me and you want a very quiet bike on the descent, the XT for me still remains supreme. I would put this similar to the old Axis. So overall, if I ignore the slight compatibility issue with the highest gear on my frame, yeah, it's a solid product. Now, will it stay a solid product for a long time? We'll find out. There is a 2-year warranty, but I'm also glad that SRAM has some competition. So if you're someone who already has a bike with a drivetrain setup and you want to switch to wireless shifting instead of making a huge investment into the transmission, chain, cassette, derailleur, you could just purchase this derailleur and shifter, and boom, you've got wireless shifting. So in that case, the value is quite good. But if you're starting from scratch and you're going to invest in the cassette and a chain and derailleur anyway, yeah, the overall cost is only a little bit less. And a lot of that is the SRAM pod. For some reason, that shifting pod is really expensive. SRAM also has a lot of serviceable parts on the derailleur, so if you are breaking your derailleurs pretty often, it might be cheaper to have the GX transmission and just replace, the cage, rather than smashing this derailleur and you gotta replace the whole thing. So that's it for my initial impressions and review of this derailleur. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. Also let me know if this is something that you'd want to ride, and on that, I'll see you guys in the next one.